Well, Dr. Robyne, welcome to the show. I am so excited to talk to you and have you on.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Well, I have been reading your latest book, and I'm just amazed by your story and how it led you to doing what you're doing today. So, can you share your story with our listeners?
Of course. So thank you for asking. So I can share just kind of context. So what I do now is I'm somebody who works in the field of resiliency and wellness, and I support families and groups and organizations trying to find strategies on how to manage their comebacks, how to manage, through difficult seasons or setbacks. So that's the work I do. I've been teaching in the university now for almost 20 years, and I really appreciate this opportunity to be able to connect with people to talk about some practical ways on how we can support, especially our family systems, our teenagers. And the reason why this area of supporting teenagers is so important to me is I myself is somebody who went through a very tumultuous season of teenagerhood. I struggled right in school right from early years. Early years, I was identified as somebody who had some learning difficulties, learning differences, and some challenges. I struggled with some behavioral issues. And the reality is back then, and that wasn't that long ago, they just didn't know what to do with a girl like me in class. They didn't know how to find the supports. And at the time, my family wasn't even quite sure what I needed. So it was left in this kind of not talked about, but we knew Robyne was struggling type way. And unfortunately, I started to develop a lot of maladaptive behaviors, which happens often when our needs aren't being met one way or another, academically and emotionally. And I ended up getting myself into a pretty challenging season, especially, by like 15 and 16 years old, where I was now hanging out with probably not the ideal crowd my family would want me to be associating with. I was making some pretty dark choices. And what I think is so interesting is that it seemed as if it was a very quite sudden onset from the outside. Like if you were to look at me from the outside of my family system, you would think, oh, she was a relatively happy-go-lucky girl. But then all of a sudden teenagerhood seemed to really kind of, that's when she lost her way. The reality is I was losing my way right from probably early elementary school, but that's when the behaviors became just more obvious, I think, on the outside. And unfortunately, in my situation, it led to me dropping out of high school. I dropped out of high school in grade 10, managed some pretty major mental health challenges and some episodes. And again, that risk-taking behavior got really out of hand. Now, our family and my family, they loved me hard, but quite helplessly. They really struggled to know what are we supposed to do here. And in one of their, I guess you could say, an attempt at an intervention, our family moved. We actually moved from kind of the big bustling city to a small community. And I did start to get better. I started to heal and learn and did a lot of relationship repair, which comes with having to, when we start going into our recoveries. And one of the things that was quite remarkable for me is a marker we had set up in our family for me kind of knowing that I was on the right track again was getting my driver's license, right? When I had the responsibility, Cheryl, of having my driver's license, we knew I was on the right course. And in my particular situation, if you don't mind me, I can share what happened next.
Wow.
I did my driver's license. I had it for 1 week and I was a brand new driver early into my recovery. And I was driving home late at night by myself on a lonely stretch of road, and a snowstorm rolled in very quickly. And I lost control of my vehicle, and the vehicle went off the road and down an embankment. And my vehicle crashed through the ice and it sank in the river. And I was trapped in a sinking car. I was drowning. And what was so remarkable in that moment, I leaned deeply into words my mother had shared with me since I was a little girl, which was that Robyne can do hard things. Robyne finds a way to get out of situations. Robyne is able to problem solve. My mother had this steadfast belief in me that I could figure things out. And I was that kid who could always figure it out. And I used that to really kind of give me that steadfast confidence, that energy I needed to be able to escape. And I escaped through the window, and I was able to make my way to the surface. I was about 20 feet underwater by the time I got out of the car. And despite the ice in that situation, I was able to get myself to at least above water. And that night, actually, there was a gentleman named Joseph, just a gentleman in his mid-30s driving home from shift work. And Joseph just happened to see my car tracks in the snow. And he just happened to drive all along the side of that road to see if he could see anyone. And he did see my body out on the ice. And he pulled his truck over and he grabbed wood and chain from his pickup truck. And Joseph actually crawled out onto the ice and threw out that chain, wrapped it around my body, and he dragged me to shore. He was awarded the Governor General's Award for Bravery, which is the highest honor that civilians are given for risking their life, really, to save a stranger. And I'll share with you just momentarily, last kind of idea. I recall waking up in the hospital and my mother was there. And my mother asked me, how I did it. How was I able to get through that? And I said to my mother, it was very much because she had told me I could do hard things. And my mother said that wasn't quite what she ever meant when she told me that, but she was glad it worked in my favor. So, and that became the second comeback of me devoting my life to getting well, to healthy, but also personally and professionally learning about human resiliency and what we can do for our teenagers. So that way they didn't have to go through the same things I did.
Yeah. Wow. Such a powerful story. I mean, I know you say in the book, people have said it's a miracle, and I agree.
Yes.
And in just thinking the timing of it all, of how, I'm just that he actually took the time to even see that there were, that there were tracks in the snow. And right when he came, just the timing of everything. It really is unbelievable. And what was that? You said you had some questioning about why did I survive? There was some what's the word? Some reactions that you were having afterwards. Was that difficult for you, recovering from that?
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting. It's a phenomenon I've actually talked to other persons who have gone through, whether it's called, survivor's guilt, or just kind of not really understanding how something so substantive or so, sensational can actually happen to someone and what that means and where do we go from here, and I have talked to others who've had similar in their own right, these pretty catastrophic events. And, that it's pretty, I think now I've learned that it's quite normal to question, how does this make sense, or what do I make sense of this? And for the first wee while, what was so challenging for me is, given how off track I was before my car accident, it was really hard for me to feel as though that I was somebody really that was worthy of a miracle. I look around at other people who were going through so much more than I had gone through. And, I wanted them to have miracles. I didn't feel worthy or deserving of it. So one of my strategies that I started to work upon, and some of that heart work that sometimes we have to do, is recognizing that things happen and this was my story and my life was unfolding, and to trust, right? To trust the process, that there's a reason for whatever reason it might be. I'm still learning that myself, but figuring out what comes next and accepting my miracle for what it was.
Yeah. Wow. And after this happened, were you immediately drawn to resilience? Just learning about that when you went to college and now teaching and being a professor at a university? Or did you how did that happen?
Yeah, great question. So I think often we think sometimes that these recoveries are quite almost like turning points, right? Where all of a sudden it's like, okay, this person, had this event and now they're on the right track and they're good to go. My recovery was anything but linear. So the first step in my recovery was starting to do that relationship repair with my family and my community, because I needed to do some work there to establish trust and kind of learn about who I was and who I was no longer, and who I didn't want to become. So there was a lot of work that happened in those early months after my accident. And one of the really significant components was that piece about, for me, getting back into school. I knew that school was going to be that structure that I needed. I understood the value of education. And I needed to actually realize that I never really had developed the skills to learn. So I spent a lot of time doing those learning to learn skills, almost kind of going back to kind of figuring out from square one, how do I do this work? So I started actually through correspondence to kind of learn some of those skills, especially some of those key milestones that I had missed in my earlier education. And then I kind of from there, it started to be these slow, steady steps in the right direction. So I finished high school and was able to go on to college. And then I was able to go on even, past that to university and finish multiple degrees. And the whole time I always had this curiosity about psychology and resiliency and wellness, and really about development, like how teenagers kind of get there, especially when they grow up in such solid, loving families. I grew up in an amazing family system that on paper, any child should have a really bright trajectory if they grow up with all of that opportunity and privilege, yet somehow I still got off course. So it was definitely a curiosity that I carried all the way through in my education. And the whole time I was doing that work to learn about my experience, but also wanting to be of service, wanting to find a way to then share this with others. So that way we could pass on that knowledge and that wisdom.
Wow. I can't help but think, how much your story gives hope to moms that are listening, because their kids have been struggling so much, especially since the pandemic. I mean, it's really been tough on kids, and struggling with school and not wanting to get out of bed and not wanting to go to school and wanting to drop out of school and feeling anxious and depressed. And I just thought this would be such a good topic to talk about with you about what, you have 5 pillars of resilience. Maybe we should start there.
Sure.
What are they, and how can we use the tools and the pillars to help our kids, especially right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And right now I've working with families worldwide, like the teenagerhood, especially they're having a very hard season right now. And I think one of the reasons, we will get into, I'd be happy to share the pillars, but I think what's important is that context of why this is so hard for our, our tweens and our teenagers is because teenagerhood is such a short season. And, you might get 4 or 5 years, maybe 6 years. And because of recent global events, they've lost half of that. Now, as an adult, with our adulthood, looking like, oh my goodness, more than like 40 years, for us to lose a few years in our adulthood, it's probably not as a big of a deal. But to our teenagers, they have missed so many rites of passage that we promised them as a society. We promised them great birthdays and graduations and proms and all of the things about getting ready. And that has just come to a halt. So I think that children, especially in our teenagers, are reeling from a lot of these losses, not to mention the grief and the sadness of the fact that they've seen firsthand the impact of a global health pandemic, right? They'd never seen this before. We as grownups hadn't seen this before. So you're absolutely right. Our teenagers are hurting, and how we can meet them where they are. And that's when that piece about resiliency comes in. The first pillar is belonging, right? Helping them see that they have a place and a space, and they have a very important role in our family systems. For children to feel safe and to be able to be resilient, they need a home team. They need that constant caring, person in their world that's going to see them and accept them for who they are. So that home team, that psychological safety is so important. The second that we talk about is perspective, and helping our children to have their perspective grow, because our perspective grows in relation to our lived experience, and our teenagers don't have as much experience yet. So we need to do our job to help them kind of make their way in the world and help them figure out our values and what matters most and what attitudes and mindsets are going to set them up for success, how to manage those big emotions and feelings. Now, the third one we talk about in this work is acceptance, and acceptance is hard because there's some things in the world we don't like, and we don't like how it's unfolding. I recall, personally, when I was a wee bit older and going through my schooling, realizing that, I was diagnosed with learning disabilities and ADHD. And I remember sitting there at the time being like, well, I didn't sign up for this, right? I didn't want this. I had envisioned my recovery, and having more challenges thrown in there wasn't what I was accepting or wanted to accept. And again, one of the the lessons we've learned about in this research is that helping people to find the tools to really accept or at least coexist with some of the parts, the hard parts, is extremely important. And the last two pillars we talk about is hope, right? Having someone cultivate and help us cultivate a sense of living hope-filled. That's what we can do as parents and supporters and caregivers, is to help them realize, yes, there's a lot of noise and negativity in this world, and there's a lot of joy. There's a lot of beauty. There's positives out there. We just need to know where to find them. And the last pillar we talk about is actually humor. This idea that lightheartedness and joy and merriment and play and laughter are so important for our ability to weather difficult seasons. So helping them find that they could you're still allowed to have a good day, even in an unwell world.
Yeah, those are so good.
Thank you.
So good. And you just think about, as you say that, I'm struck by belonging. Like our kids have been home. Like that sense of belonging has been so difficult as they've been isolated, and then they're on their phones, but that's not really giving them that sense of belonging. And I'm thinking, I relate to you a lot because I had learning differences as well. And I had ADHD. And of course, I was a daydreamer and attentive type. But I always felt out of it. I always felt like, what's wrong with me? Why don't I understand this? Why is everybody else getting it, but I'm not getting it? Which I don't really think was true. I think there's probably quite a few kids that were not getting it, but I felt like I was the only one.
Yeah.
And so I remember really feeling like the weird kid that was a little different. And moving was actually good for me. We moved too. And I felt like I got a fresh start when I moved. I kind of could leave that person behind, even though I was struggling. But that sense of belonging when you feel like you're different. Yeah. And yet I'm struck by your mom gave you hope because she was always telling you could do hard things. And do you look at it like that you, because I think, gosh, if I was in that situation, would I have had that, that resiliency to like get out of that car? But you had that message that she kept telling you, that's such a good mantra, that you can do hard things. Yeah. And I think we have to believe that about our kids when they're struggling too. We have to believe in them.
100%. Absolutely. That belonging pillar is so fundamental to how we are able to show up in our lives. Like we need that ability to know that there's a safe place, that people are going to welcome us, even if we're the ones that sometimes screwed up or even brought some of these, negative experiences into our lives. We have to have someone in the world that says, I'm going to stand by you and I'm going to fight for you and I'm going to fight with you and I'm going to stand by you as this is unfolding. So yes, that belonging is so key. And, I feel so often we have this, like we have a biological underpinning to find community, right? Like we're community, we're social creatures. And our adolescents, I see it so markedly where you see them just so desperate to fit in, right? Like they just want to be included. They want to be part of it. And even if they, they kind of even sometimes maybe show a sense of resistance to it. They're like, no, I don't want to be part of that, or that's silly, or I don't want to be included. Deep down, they have this biological yearning to be included. And unfortunately, when that true belonging in this authentic, wholehearted way isn't met, that need, that's when we start struggling with that fitting in, because there's such a marked difference between fitting in and belonging. Like when you belong to someone, we have this deep empathetic attunement, right? Like I know for my children, I have 3 teenagers myself, like they know I have their back. And they also know though, that I'm going to hold them to a very high standard of our family values. And I grew up with that as well. Even though I did go off track, I think one of the reasons I was able to have a comeback and get back on course was because I knew what direction mattered. And, all roads lead home. And those homes are where those values were, those key messages that my mother shared with me.
Wow. So what do you think are some of the roadblocks? How, what do you think that we can tend to do that gets in the way of our kids developing that resilience?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the things that I talk about this often in my work, in my research, and when I'm working with families is this pull for grownups and supporters and parents between being a supporter and being a rescuer. So I think one of the things that I see often is we do a lot of rescuing, right? We don't want our children to have bad experiences or bad days. We want to protect them from all of the horrible things that can happen in the world. So we try to like kind of almost, it's like they're too safe for their own good, that we're not teaching them and allowing them to experience natural consequences. And I often talk about this difference between, risk and danger. Like if our children are in danger, of course you have to rescue them. That's a non-negotiable. But it's understanding that there's a bit of risk that children need to be able to develop. And when they're younger, the risks have lower stakes. But when they're higher, the stakes are bigger. And I don't want the first time, for example, our daughter trying to like do critical thinking is when she's off at college. I want her to be able to learn it when she's little, have opportunity for feedback. But again, I appreciate that's not easy to do. But I think that where we're getting our children, unfortunately, in these positions is that we're not instilling in them the confidence that we think they can do hard things without us. And we're rescuing them from situations that they can problem solve their way through.
Yeah, that's good. It's almost like we have to tell ourselves, my kid can do hard things. My kid can do hard things. Your mom was telling you, but she was believing you could do hard things. And then you were able to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, what I think what's so important is that we model that every single day. And my mother modeled that. And I try to do that with my children as well. So, for example, when they're saying, oh, this math problem is so hard, the response is, well, good thing Jackson can do hard things. Right. So like, it's giving them that, like, I believe in you. It's just this constant message that I believe in you. And I'm going to stand here as this witness that's going to trust that you can go as far as you can. And when it's time, I'll intervene, right? If there's that skill gap or that knowledge gap, I'll intervene. And you don't have to do this alone, but I'm not going to rescue you from it.
Yeah. So good. So, so explain to the listeners and to me, what are some interpersonal dynamics? You talk about the interpersonal dynamics in a family and why that matters. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I think what's so important, again, to really kind of really instill this sense of belonging is recognizing kind of the individual within the family system. So recognizing that, I often talk about the fact that I look at our three children and they're so markedly different, right? They're only 2 years apart, each one of them, but they're their own complete own entities. And I often talk about the fact that, if I take our oldest, for example, Hunter, he had a mom with no experience. And if I look at Ava 2 years later, she was a mom who had another child in 2 years experience. And when you look at Jax, he came along, he was 4 years, I had 4 years experience at this point and two other siblings, right? He had two other siblings. So recognizing that they grow up differently because they're different, but also we're different with our expertise and our learned, those hard lessons learned through the parenting process and season. So one of the things we often talk about is that we have a tendency of always like grouping people together, right? So it's like grownups and children or siblings, and helping them to be able to form their identity and knowing their skills, their gifts, their talents, and helping them see that and having a role in the family system can really help do that work. That's something that can start that conversation.
Yeah. How would you say to start that? Where would you encourage parents to start?
Yeah. So I love having conversations with children and families around, what are some of the skills that we've learned, right? To actually just do it, even just kind of chit-chatting in the car through Cardful, or even, just sitting around, having some quiet time of, just ask, okay, so what are some of the skills? What are some of the things that are actually our talents, and then thinking about, okay, what are our gifts? And I can share with you, an example, our daughter, who's now 16, Ava, ever since she was a toddler, just has this deep compassion for animals, right? Like she just loves animals, and the way that she's able to tend to our pets in our house, she does it in this natural, intuitive way. And it isn't because it's not a gendered issue, right? It's not because she's a girl and it's caretaking. She just actually just so relates to animals. So we talk about that as that Ava has this gift, right? It doesn't bother her at all to wake up and, let a dog out or to take a dog for a walk or to feed the cats, because she just always wants to, she's with them. She's attuned to them. So we talk openly about that. We all have these gifts, right? And Jax, I can share with you, our youngest, he is the funniest human I have ever met in my entire life. And he just has this gift of joy and laughter, and he shares it so generously. So helping our children see their traits and their characteristics and their gifts and their talents beyond things like doing well in school, right? Beyond things like, oh, you're an athlete. And of course, those are good things as well, but really helping them embody just this beautiful mosaic that makes up who they are. And when we start talking about those ideas of everyone having skills and talents and gifts, what that does, it just broadens the conversation of what we are able to become versus, I'm good at this, or I'm going to do that. It just really helps them see that this multidimensionalness that comes with us, and it serves the children well as they grow up.
Yeah, we have to be curious to really slow down, don't we? And notice what our kids' strengths are. Yes. And humor. Like you might have a kid that doesn't want to do their homework and is saying, I've done my homework and they haven't handed any assignments. And I had one that was like that. Oh, I've already done it, only to find out that they weren't, the assignments weren't handed in. But that there was there's a strength that you can point out that is encouraging to them, and you're seeing them and who they are and helping them to cultivate that's positive. Have you found in your research that when parents do that, it helps kids excel in other areas as well?
Yes, absolutely. One of the things we definitely see when children kind of have this like predictability, and they have, this structure that is actually quite firm at times, which I know is so hard for us to do as moms, because we want them to be warm and affectionate, and we just want them to be okay no matter what. Sometimes it's that piece about the children that grow up with that like deep sense of, I know I'm okay. I know this is my boundaries, these are my parameters. I have skills and gifts and talents within it. And I'm held to a high level of, ideals or standards or this accountability piece. Those are the children that thrive. So it's the children that aren't living living in fear, the children that have their needs met, obviously, but there's so often how many of us are approaching our parenting practices is that we're actually cultivating compliance, where that's setting our children up on this trajectory for this like disease to please, where they're just trying to please people all the time, versus recognizing that, sometimes we rock the boat. We have difficult conversations. Like we're willing to go there because, keeping the peace isn't always what it's cracked out to be. Sometimes we have to actually to have the difficult conversations and set those firm boundaries. And again, those are the children that really thrive, especially going into adulthood, the ones that know how to work within those systems.
That's such a great point, because I do think that it's so important that our kids develop that, where they can say no. And what I see is that kids so often now with social media, they're looking outside of themselves for that approval.
Yes.
And it's not internalized. And so it's like, I know I was a people pleaser, and that is a real bind, because it was, before I really started that heart work, as you put it, I love that. I was always looking for it outside myself, but that is such a unstable place to be. Because then if you're not feeling like you're getting it outside yourself, then it's very rocky, and we're depending on our self-esteem and our sense of who we are from other people versus internally. So I like that, you mentioned that. How would you encourage moms? Because this is the tough thing to do, is to balance being able to help that, not to overhelp, not to rescue, and to let them be independent, and yet at the same time have high expectations. I think that's really difficult balance for what does that look like with your kids?
Yeah. So I can tell you from my experience, and there was a season where I was a single mother. So I was on my own for a season, and that was I think even more complex because I was doing all of it, right? Like I was trying to be the soft place and the disciplinarian and the person providing for our family. So I just really want to acknowledge that when we're in, different seasons and change seasons, some of this actually is even more challenging than when we're in like steady seasons. And I do believe, though, one of the things I give thanks for is that season when I was doing it alone, that season very much, kind of bred this necessity that we actually had to work as a team, right? So that season actually made it so we had to have very clear expectations of who's doing what and how we do this. And we got really clear, and I would say over communicated what those expectations were and what that was going to look like. So to make that like more practical versus abstract, it's this idea of starting with knowing what are the family values, what are the characteristics or values that you want to have, almost like your family code. So I can share with you, even from the children when they were toddlers, we talk about respect, and you respect me, and I am also going to respect you. It has to go both ways to really forge that bond that we know that we have one another's back, right? That we know that we're in it together, and we're able to have those difficult conversations. We're able to kind of let people be individuals when we actually allow them to be respected. Now, again, I appreciate it's challenging to do this, but one of the things that we saw is that the children will then start to meet and rise to that occasion, right? They're going to be like, I am a child who carries myself with self-respect, which means, I can share with you, I remember, a family member wanting to give the children a big hug. And I stopped and said, you need to ask them for consent. Like you need to ask them whether or not they're comfortable having a hug. And of course, at the time that was like, radical, and I'm a feminist, obviously, right? So all of a sudden it causes this big uproar. But teaching the children from when they were young, you get to say whether or not somebody gives you a hug, somebody touches you. Like those are fundamentally important things that children have to learn, this idea about honoring their self, honoring who they are in these interactions, in these relationships. So again, something as simple as like, if, how often do we see people say like, no, go give them a hug, right? No, go, go hug them. If we want our children to respect themselves, and we have to model that, and that's one of those strategies. So I can share that from one of the things that we saw in our family system. And as the children have grown up, the other part that I think is so important, and this is again, the heart work for moms, we have to kind of check our ego at the door. My daughter and my sons, their success is not my success, right? Yes, like recognizing that they're their own people. And I appreciate it's fun, especially on social media, to put up pictures of your child as the valedictorian or your child being accepted into these schools. I get that. That's very much something that we almost want the world to say, you did good, right? You did well. Look at your healthy, functional, contributing teenagers. And if we really want to set our children up for success, I think we have to recognize that when is our ego in it, and when are we doing things because we think that's going to look better to the outside world versus is this what's actually better for our family in like that true sense of what's best for our family.
Yes. Check the ego at the door.
Yes.
But this is a reflection of me as a parent. That goes both ways, because if you're struggling, we can feel like we're failing. Yes. Or if they're doing well, we're doing well, which they're going to go through different seasons of struggle and challenge, and it's supporting them through that. So such good stuff. Can you think of like anything else that I haven't asked you that you would want to share?
Sure. I can share with my, just for your listeners, I can share my two favorite kind of parenting support ideas. The first one I want to share, if it's okay, is one of the ways to one of the strategies I found have worked extremely well with families and also my own family. When you have to do corrections, right? Because we do have to correct children's behavior. We do have to give feedback. My gentle invitation here is to connect before you correct. So often we are so quick to correct. And my invitation is, if you can just pause ever so slightly and just take a few minutes to connect and kind of see, how did their day go, or how are they feeling, or what's top of mind for them, or what's something that they're curious about, before we remind them that they didn't do their chores, or before we kind of get into the correction that we have to give them. I find there's such a difference when we hold that space for one another to connect with them first and then offer the correction. It goes so much smoother versus if we just try to jump in and do corrections. So that would be one little takeaway I can share with your group. And the last one, and this is my favorite, and this one's so close to my heart. Because people ask me all the time, how do we cultivate resilient kids, and how do we know our kids are okay? And we're worried about our children. I understand that. One of the wisdoms that was imparted with me is that when you hug your child, okay, it doesn't matter if they're toddlers or grown-ups, when you hug your child, let them pull away first. Okay, let your child pull away first. And sometimes you're going to get these quick little snuggles, and other times you might notice that your teenager lingers for an extra minute or two. And that really is so important, because sometimes it's hard to put into words that we need help. And that can give us just that little bit of data that says, oh, somebody needs just a little bit of extra support right now. So they are the ones that are kind of holding that barometer. And I can share with you, my oldest now is 18 years old, 6'5". He's a big boy. And there'll be times when he'll still come home and, I get the quick little hug or the pat on the head that he likes to do so often. And there's other times where when he gives me a hug, I just notice he just stays there for a few extra seconds. And that's when I know that we're in alignment and we're on the same team, and he knows that this is a safe place, because again, all roads lead home, and home needs to be our safe place.
Yeah, home needs to be our safe place. Yeah. Wow. Really good. We are so quick to point out what's want to fix, what's not quite, what we see as not quite the way it should be, or to correct them. And I love that. Connect before you correct. Mm-hmm. And then they'll be able to hear it so much more, if we're just putting that relationship first. So thank you, Dr. Robyne, so much. Tell everybody where to get your book and where to find you, all your amazing resources. And you have great downloads.
Thank you.
And videos on your website too, that they can watch. Because I subscribed and I got one of your downloads and I found it very inspiring for me.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. Yeah. So it's just Robyne, Robyne. There's an E on the end of my name, hd.ca. Dr. Robyne on socials. It's quite easy to find. And again, thank you for the opportunity and the honor to be able to connect today. I just love what you are doing, and just this powerful voice in such a complex season of childhood and adolescent development. Thank you for all that you're doing. And I'm just honored to be able to connect with you today. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Honored to have you on.